Hello, my friends. I wanted to share something with you today that I find fascinating, and it happens to be one of my favorite events of the Easter story. I say the Easter story, but it actually occurred during the week before those events. Days before the triumphal entry, Jesus made a trip to Jericho. During this trip, we read from Matthew about these events. And as they went out of Jericho, a great crowd followed him. And behold, there were two blind men sitting by the roadside. And when they heard that Jesus was passing by, they cried out, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." The crowd rebuked them, telling them to be silent. But they cried out all the more, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." And stopping, Jesus called them and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Lord, let our eyes be opened." And Jesus, in pity, touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight and followed him. These same events are recorded by Mark in chapter 10 of his gospel account and Luke in chapter 18 of his. Mark, however, named a single blind beggar, Bartimaeus, as the one who was healed, with Jesus saying to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." Luke also mentioned a single blind man, though unnamed, but relays the healing as having occurred as Jesus drew near to Jericho rather than as he was leaving. So what are we to make of these differences? Matthew and Mark recorded this as having taken place as Jesus was leaving Jericho. Luke recorded it as having taken place on the way into Jericho. There's a fairly easy explanation for that. Ancient historians Josephus and Eusebius distinguished between the old city on its original site and the newer part of the city that had grown up under the influence of Herod. They were a short distance from one another, so the likelihood is that it actually occurred in the same spot in all the accounts. Matthew and Mark, older gentlemen at the time when they recorded these events, likely had the ancient site in mind. Luke, a younger fellow, probably was considering the more recent area. So as Jesus was leaving the old city and moving into the new city, that's where he encountered these men on the side of the road. But what about the fact that Matthew records the healing of two men? Mark and Luke record the healing of one, with Mark naming him as Bartimaeus. The most likely explanation here is that Bartimaeus was a person that would have been known to some in Mark's audience. We don't know the rest of his story, but it's possible and likely that he was more well known either before these events in that area or became more well known afterwards. Luke's record is likely also of Bartimaeus. He simply doesn't name him. As a more well-known figure, his experience was given emphasis in the recollection of these events that Luke, who did research to find out about them because he wasn't present for them, found out about when he was told of these things for his account. Rather than evidence of error in the Gospels, these things ground these events in reality. The fact that two older authors had a historic site in mind and one younger author had the newer one reflects a very real way that people think and communicate. One man or two, Bartimaeus, named or unnamed, reflects the way these events were remembered and retold. I imagine one conversation between those from the town and familiar with it going like this. "Hey, you know Bartimaeus? Yeah, I remember him. Wait till you hear what happened to him." And then another among those less familiar with the town and its inhabitants. "Did you hear about what happened over in Jericho the other day? Jesus healed a couple of blind beggars. It's amazing." This is how reality unfolds. And ultimately, it is the reality of these events and the circumstances during which they occurred which is so fascinating. As I mentioned earlier, these things happened during the equivalent of this week around 2,000 years ago. When I say equivalent, I mean during the week prior to what we refer to as Holy Week, the days leading up to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So, put this in context. Jesus is about to embark upon the most important week of his life. I can't really even begin to imagine the anticipation and stress that he must have been dealing with during these days. He knew what awaited him. The Messiah was about to finish the work of redemption. He was about to fulfill the promise to Abraham in Genesis 12 that through his offspring, all the families of the earth would be blessed, opening up the way of salvation for all mankind. He was about to fulfill the proto-evangelium, the first gospel foretold to the serpent in Genesis 3, that the offspring of Eve would crush his head, destroying his scheme to destroy God's beloved creation of mankind. He was about to fulfill what he had always known was coming since before the dawn of creation, as the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world of Revelation 13. This is it. Yet, very near to his final entry into Jerusalem, some commentators place these events on Thursday evening or Friday morning before what we refer to as Palm Sunday. Before all this, he stopped to heal a couple of blind beggars on the side of the road. A seemingly simple thing, a rather small thing in comparison to some of the other miracles Jesus did. A bit of a byline in the story when you consider the context of what's about to occur. But it's not. It may be simple, but it's incredibly profound. No act of Jesus was small. This was no byline, but a central part of the nature and mission of Jesus Christ. This one act tells us so much about who he is. In the midst of preparing for the most important moment in human history, Jesus was not too busy, too preoccupied, or too absorbed with his grand mission to stop, be moved with compassion for those that others ignored, and meet their needs. 2,000 years later, that hasn't changed because he hasn't changed. No matter what is going on in the world, no matter how big events become, God is never too busy, too preoccupied, or too calloused to care for you, wherever you are and whatever your needs may be. Jesus' mission was about people, redeeming them, restoring our relationship with the Father so that we might call directly upon him and know his blessed presence at all times. The problems of the world may be grand, but God is grander still. He can handle the orbit of the sun and the flight of the sparrow. He knows your name, and he loves you. I hope you'll dwell deeply upon this reality this week and heed the words of Hebrews 4. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. May the Lord of grace and mercy be near to you today and all the days that follow.